Let's talk about training first of all. As far as my experience goes, there is no direct correlation between training and skills development. Okay, there's no direct training, no direct relationship between training or teaching and skills development. Most of you would agree your education only truly started when you actually began work, right? Where you've got the absolute implementation and execution of the things you learned about theoretically, even if it's supervised practice, not the same. Being on your own, on a farm, on a ranch, in a field, trying to deal with something, that's learning. Okay, that's where you develop that hard craft, those skills that training doesn't provide. So first of all, I just want to set your expectations about training, what it can't do. Okay, training doesn't develop skills meaningfully, because even if you incorporate things like role play or practice and stuff like that, they're pretend. Okay, so the brain doesn't deal with it on the same level. It's not the same as real application of something tangible. Okay, so even if you're practicing, it's not the same thing. So first of all, training has got strong limitations in terms of skill development. You might get like a starting step. You might get from not knowing something to knowing enough about it to take a chance. What most people do in a training situation is they listen and then they do nothing. Right? That's same point with your customers, right? They listen and then they do nothing, or they forget, because that's what people do when they receive instructions or when they're told what to do. The effect has actually got a name, one of the founding kind of fathers of modern education, called the Ebbinghaus effect, or the Ebbinghaus rule, often known as the forgetting rule. What training has been shown to deliver is an 11 to 18% information transfer within 48 hours if it's used. Okay, now some people have good memories, right? That's an outlier. Some people just have photographic, but that's not normal. Like a normal thing is not to just receive. My brother-in-law's like that. You just tell him stuff and he remembers. It's kind of annoying. But like most humans have to work much harder at lodging new information in with all of those existing noises as well about current behaviors. Does that make sense? Never mind all the psychological stuff around risk and making mistakes and all failing and all that kind of stuff. Just the basic receiving information and remembering it is about 11 to 18% within 48 hours if you use it. The problem is that, so we lose 80%, like you've already forgotten stuff we talked about at the beginning of our session today. Then the other 80%, the rest of it, of the 20%, we forget that over a 3-week period. So that's why a lot of times with training, you might go on a course in the business world. At college, you have the advantage of keep going to classes all the time, right? So you get the benefit of that repeated exposure to some information. But it's why some people thrive and some people don't, because the people that thrive are the people based on the judgment assessment. The judgment mechanism is remembrance. Not being a highly skilled surgeon, it's just your ability to recall information. And some people just wired that way. Some people are not. So the problem is with training is that we tell people information, they're already forgetting it before we've even finished the conversation because they've got 50 million other things to think about. And then by the time 2 or 3 weeks has gone by, they can barely remember anything that we've talked about. I could do the best job training something. Without that next phase, nothing happens. That's why training is viewed as a cost by most businesses. That's what training is. You do it, then there's never any follow-up because we go back and it's commercially, like we're busy, and then we don't do anything with the information. And then it was a waste of money because unless we grab it within 2 or 3 weeks, waste of money. The enemies of training, of teaching, instruction, actually, volume of information, time allowed for the transition of that information into a skill. Okay, and normally what happens with my clients all the time. Normally what happens is too much information needs to be given in too short a space of time, and then the expectation is that information translates into a skill immediately, because that means we wouldn't have to do it again. So in a training situation, you get a lot of learner blame. You blame people for not remembering things, like we blame our clients for not remembering things, even though the methodology was flawed. So we're saying, why don't you remember? Why don't you do what I asked you to do? And it's, well, it's how you told them. You just told them. And when you just tell people, they forget it. Doesn't matter whether you're telling them, teaching them, training them, doesn't make any difference. So this is where the rubber meets the road on this stuff. Training is only 10%. It's not me, it's Harvard, but it's also any L&D book you read. Training is only 10% of a learning journey. However, it is treated as 100% of the solution in most cases, for the reasons I've just mentioned. It is cheap per head. Does that make sense? If you can get like 20 people in a room, 15 people in a room, it's cheap. It's much cheaper than me spending time with each individual, much cheaper. So training is only 10% of the solution. And I think where we have a novel approach is that we want to teach you guys how to be the trainers, the mentors, and the coaches, because that's where you'll see the benefit. Not when you outsource it to people like me, but when you insource it to people like you, because it becomes behavioral and cultural, and then it becomes exponential in its effect. When you view this as the way to get things done, that's the light bulb moment. That's a game-changing moment. When you view this as something else we have to do, that's a problem. So how do we avoid that? How do we flatten out that curve? How do we make sure that after an event, things stay live and current? Well, that's where we got to use another tool, which is mentorship.